Welcome to Detective Diaries, brought to you by Private Detectives Answers Investigation. If you're captivated by the art of deduction, the thrill of solving the unsolvable, or the enigmatic world of private investigation, you have just found your new favourite podcast. Detective Diaries are where secrets are unravelled and the truth is always a clue away. Presented by Private Detective Answers Investigation. Each episode contains offbeat conversations about the real people involved in investigation.
Detective Diaries has returned. Here we talk about some of the offbeat aspects of private investigation. In this series we've spoken to investigators, to forensic experts and much more. However, today I'm in Brighton, a city that I love and adore, where I'm meeting with a very different type of guest. Joining me today is James Lupton, who lived a long time in the heart of Colombia in South America, navigating the rich complexities of the local language. James and I first met a while ago when a client had asked us to interview and take a witness statement from a Colombian national for what was to be a high-profile case to be heard in the Colombian courts. The requirement was for the witness testimony to be videoed and recorded and for a translator to interpret live. While the witness naturally spoke Spanish, there are differences in nuance between Spanish from Spain, often called Castilian Spanish, and Colombian Spanish, especially in pronunciation, vocabulary, and pronoun usage. When we think of translation, we often think of converting text. But our guest today knows it's so much more than that. It's about translating culture, nuance, and history. James is a Spanish translator specializing in the unique expressions, dialects, and slang of Colombian culture. From the bustling streets of Bogota to the rhythmic coastal towns, James has spent years bridging the gap between English and Colombian Spanish. For us, a couple of months ago, it would have been a relatively easy job to recruit a Spanish translator. What would be ideal for us, we decided, was to have a translator who understood those Colombian nuances, and it needed somebody with the experience of James. I was introduced to James by a mutual contact who had worked in Central America and knew him from their circuit. James, please do not correct my Spanish, but buenos días, ¿cómo va?
Muy bien, gracias. ¿Cómo estás tú? Bien?
And now I'm starting to get a little bit lost.
No, well, it's a pleasure. It's really nice to be here with you, see you again, meet you again. I'm looking forward to this chat. Hope you enjoy it.
Okay, well, I mean, I've got a few questions in my head. I must be honest, I didn't really think too much about this in advance, but your life, your career, it's not the normal path, I suspect, that a translator or interpreter or whatever would take. So how did it happen for you? How did you become a translator?
Well, I am a translator, but I'm also an interpreter, and that's what I actually did when I was working for you. We always make a difference. We always distinguish between translating, which is basically the written word, and interpreting, which is spoken work. And I must say I prefer the term interpreting really because I think it's closer to what actually happens. You're trying to interpret, to make sense of what the person that you're working with is saying in order to communicate that, translate that into, interpret it for a new audience that doesn't speak the language that they do. How did I get into it? Well, I don't have any formal language training. I learned my Spanish because I was doing a PhD in Colombia.
Wow.
And I started without speaking any Spanish at all, because in those days it was possible. And I kind of realized fairly early on that the PhD wasn't ever going to get completed. So I thought, well, the least I can do is come back from quite a long time in Colombia speaking good Spanish. So I made the decision not to have anything to do with anyone who spoke English, and I just submerged myself.
What you've said about translating as opposed to interpreting. You know, when we were sat in a room with the witness, which I mentioned earlier, do you know, it was the first time I think in my life that really came home to me when I saw you at work, because you were not just taking the person's words and putting them into English. Somehow you were talking through the nuances and what somebody was actually saying rather than the script. Is that fair? Is that a fair judgment? The mood as well.
I think so, definitely. I mean, obviously I was being very accurate in the words that I was telling you that he was saying, but I think that interpreting is more a question of trying to facilitate communication between cultures, really. And I think that, as you said in your introduction, my Spanish is fundamentally Colombian Spanish, and I think it was really interesting that you had taken the decision to try and find someone who was at ease with the way that Colombians speak. And what I was doing when I first met him, I always try and do this if I can with new people that I'm going to be working for. I always try and meet them beforehand so I can just have a chat. We can have a chat, really, so that I can get to understand the kind of language that they use, what kind of their accent often, the expressions that they use, and also, on the other side of that, so that they can feel confident that I get them, that I can understand how they speak and what they're talking about, because that means that there's a sort of a level of confidence. So, yeah, I'm in safe hands here, right from the beginning. So I will always try and have a cup of coffee with somebody and have a chat or just have a conversation beforehand so that we minimally get to know each other a bit before it starts.
Makes such a difference. So you didn't study languages at university, you learned from real life experience?
Yeah, more than anything.
No formal training?
No, I mean, I went to a not very good comprehensive school in Essex in the 1970s, so I did a bit of French. I did 2 years of French, which mainly consisted of my fellow students saying rude things to the French teacher. So I didn't... I learned a bit. I realised that I had a facility, that there was something in my mind that meant that how people say things or think in another language is something that's interesting to me. And that it was something that I knew that I would be able to do, but I'd never really done it before I went to South America.
So, what was your first job? I mean, not the first job. Everybody's first job was working in, I don't know, W.H. Smith's or somewhere. What was your first real job interpreting?
Well, my first job was as a paperboy at the age of 11, but my first interpreting job was for, back in the late 1980s, for Super Barrio.
Super Barrio?
Yeah.
And then I can vaguely remember the name, the term. Who was Super Barrio?
Well, people will have seen pictures of Mexican wrestlers, lucha libre, people who wear a mask that covers their whole face.
Yeah. What was that again? Lucha Libre?
Lucha libre.
Okay. What's Lucha Libre?
Well, I don't know much about it, but it's a performative art form, let's say. It's Mexicans get into a ring and throw each other about with choreographed moves, and it's massively popular, a bit like WFF. Is it called WFF? Like the wrestling that they have in the States, or like when I was young, we had Mick McManus and Giant Haystacks. It's not a sport, but it pretends to be a sport.
Do you know, I was just thinking about the same thing, because I think it was roughly the same age and roughly the same generation. Yeah, I can remember my mother, I think it was Saturday afternoons at 4:00, the wrestling. The wrestling was on TV, and this is before we had videos or any choice about channels. And I'm sure at the age of whatever I was, which was single numbers, I thought, why have they got people fighting on TV? And it took some time or years to ever realise that the whole thing was almost like a dance. It was choreographed, and it was a display. And who was it you mentioned? Mick McManus. I can't remember any other names, but they were absolute household names. So is that what Lucha Libre's
Lucha Libre.
Sorry, say it again. Come on.
Lucha Libre.
You're going to teach me Spanish. Lucha Libre. Is that that sort of thing that Lucha Libre and WWF grew from? Or?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the history of it, but you may remember Kendo Nagasaki, who I think was a
good grief.
wrestler who wore a full face mask.
Yes.
I think that he was probably inspired by Mexican wrestling. But anyway, the Super Barrio he emerged. There was a massive earthquake in Mexico City in 1987. It's destroyed, as these things do, largely poor working class neighbourhoods, and there was a lot of let's say, dissatisfaction with the response of the authorities. And Super Barrio emerged as the kind of hooded representative of the poor victims of the Mexico City earthquake. And he was doing a tour in London talking about the situation in full fighting gear. And somebody, I can't remember who, but somebody who said, oh, he speaks Spanish. We can ask him to do the interpreting. They got me along. And my Spanish was Colombian, and it was much less fluent than it is now, and didn't have anything Mexican about it at all. Well, I'd spent 3 months living in Mexico, actually, so I had a little bit of Mexican Spanish. But they said, he can do it, and I was as nervous as you can imagine. But I found I could do it. And so I sat next to him, and he spoke, and I spoke what he had spoken to an audience in the Conway Hall in London. And at the end, it seemed to have gone very well. People came up to me and said, oh, that was great. And I thought, oh, okay, this is something I can do. And I loved it. And I'm a bit of a tart as well. I quite like the performative aspect. So I enjoyed, and you've got no responsibility to have original ideas, really. All you have to do is interpret, is convey what somebody else is saying in a way that makes sense to people who can't understand it.
Hi, I'm Torva Coatman and I'm the head of UK Fingerprint. We take your fingerprints for police clearances overseas and other licenses. You can listen to my podcast and all the services we provide here on Detective Diaries.
So you talk about Mexico, talk about Colombia. Is there much of a difference in the two versions of Spanish?
Yeah. All Latin American countries, all Spanish-speaking countries have very distinctive aspects of the way it's spoken. A lot of vocabulary difference. Like, I'm not an expert in this, but Mexican Spanish, for instance, is shot through with a lot of indigenous words for everyday things. And they've picked up different bits of the original Peninsular Spanish, Spanish from Spain, that some of them have been preserved in one country and some of them in another. Then there might be other countries. Argentina is the classic, where Italian has had quite a lot of influence. And so, yeah, there's a kind of a sort of the equivalent of RP, if you like. There's a Spanish that everybody can understand,
Yes.
and there are common vocabulary that you can go to. But if you're going to be speaking idiomatically in southern Mexico and, let's say, the Caribbean coast of Colombia, then there are going to be a lot of local words that people might have heard of, but they might well not understand. But if you think about it, that happens between us and the States all the time as well. I mean, if you're speaking to someone from the Deep South, then they're going to be talking about food that you don't know. They're going to be using words that don't make any sense, really. So you ask them what it means. And
they're going to be putting the body in the trunk rather than, as we do in England, which is just pop the body in a boot.
Well, exactly. That's what we tend to do, isn't it? Yeah, so those kind of differences.
So you launch yourself off to Colombia. You fulfill your PhD. I can see you talking, see you looking with a little bit of pride there. Complete your PhD. What happens next?
Well, I didn't complete my PhD.
Okay.
But what I did do was meet people, get to know a fair bit about what was going on. These were interesting times in Colombia. This was the late 80s that I was living there. There were negotiations taking place when I arrived between the government and one of the main guerrilla groups. There was the emergence of what Colombia is most famous for, which I'm not going to name. The government had created certain armed groups that were working to protect the interests of certain people. It was a complicated place. And it was just sort of the beginning of the understanding or the interest of the international community in what was going on in Colombia in terms of human rights abuses. And there was a growing human rights movement. And I had been looking at the relationship between 20th century politics from the mid-century onwards and the Catholic Church in the country. And that history was interwoven with the way that the conflict and politics had emerged during that period. And people may have heard of liberation theology, which was members of the Catholic Church who became committed to the struggle of the poor and of victims of arbitrary violence and other sort of arbitrary acts. And so quite a few of the people that I met were also from the radical wing of the church and were involved in the human rights movement. And what I did when I got back, when I took the decision to stop doing the PhD, was that I started working with asylum seekers and refugees, mainly from Colombia, who were arriving in the UK. And I also began interpreting for human rights defenders who were coming over to the UK to speak to parliamentarians, to speak to people at the Foreign Office, to speak to public meetings and such like. And I became, in a way, I think, one of the sort of the go-to interpreters for that work.
Good grief. Turbulent times, not just in Colombia, but in a lot of South America and in Central America particularly. So I have to ask, do you ever find yourself in any dangerous situation and while you're working or otherwise?
I guess. I mean, I don't particularly want to, not as many as people who are not me. I worked for quite a long time in Colombia, not actually as an interpreter, not as a translator. I actually ran the office of a major UK and Irish development agency in Colombia. And most of the organisations that we worked with were engaged in human rights defence and working with local communities. And so, yeah, there were times when that meant that I came up fairly close to the kind of issues that they were facing day to day.
Anything stand out in your mind?
Well, I mean, there are a few. I mean, honestly, I do feel a little bit nervous about, I don't want to sort of do conflict tourism or anything, but yes, I mean, we were in a village once in a place called the Sur de Bolívar in northern central Colombia, which was a major river valley in the country, and there was what was called el avance paramilitar was taking place. So right-wing organizations were kind of moving up the river valley and taking territorial control and fighting people that they felt were sympathetic to or members of the guerrilla groups, or were just political activists or social activists, and their techniques involved a lot of brutality. And we did arrive in a village once where a combat had just been finished, just completed between a guerrilla group called the ELN and the Autodefensas Unidas de Colombia, the main sort of, umbrella group of the paramilitaries. And there were four. Well, when we arrived there was a guy there was a 4x4 with the International Red Cross logo on it, and there was a man who was retching at the side of the chapel. And they asked me, because he wasn't in any fit state, if I'd be prepared to go inside, because there were four dead combatants inside who'd been laid out on the chapel floor for, this is 40-degree heat we're talking about, for a couple of days, and they had dogs milling around them, and they had suffered the effects of high-velocity weaponry, let's say. They were not in a very good state. And we had to put them in body bags so that the International Red Cross could take them away. And what was particularly difficult, challenging about it was that there were 4 bodies and 3 body bags, so we had to use bin liners for the last one. So that was, for me, that was a really important experience because, Colombia was a conflict, what they used to call low-intensity conflict, low-intensity warfare. So there was stuff going on a lot, but that didn't mean that you would experience it. If you lived in the capital city like I did, that you would experience it every day. And for me, because I was working with people who were affected on a daily basis, whose lives were, not to put too fine a point on it, whose lives were in danger because of the work that they were doing. And for me to have this experience firsthand of what the implications of the war that I was working within and that I had to, for our own security and for the security of the organisations that we were working with, I had to analyse quite closely. I had to understand as far as I could, that to have this first-hand experience of the human effect of the situation within which we were living was very salutary and was very, very important, I think, to me grounding myself in the work that I was doing.
I don't think I'd wish that stark reality on anybody. So, okay, perhaps moving a little bit more upbeat. There must be some jobs that you've done, not involving body bags. There must be some jobs you've done that stand out, I think, spring to mind.
Yeah, a lot. I mean, you might have got the impression, which wouldn't be wrong, that a lot of my work is involved. I tend to do a lot of work that's based on human rights or law or things like that. We did a job once which I found just really moving. It was a group of human rights defenders from around the world. So we had people from different countries in Latin America. We had from Central America, from South America, but there were also people from Kenya, from Nepal, from West Papua, and they were all human rights defenders from different parts of the world. And it was a workshop on self-protection, on how you protect yourself physically, but also emotionally if you're engaged in this kind of work. And so this job involved what we call relay interpreting. So if, for instance, somebody from West Papua was speaking in Bahasa, in Indonesian, then the Indonesia to English interpreter put it into English, and then we would put it into Spanish, me and my colleague, and vice versa. So you've got a sort of
Almost like a chain.
a chain taking place.
Okay.
And yet people were talking about the very intimate experiences, about being ostracized by their communities, about being disowned by their families, about things like that had resulted from the fact that they had made the decision to defend human rights. And there were, as you can imagine, a lot of very emotional testimonies, stories were told. And they were coming from different experiences, different parts of the world, but they were also meeting in the middle, because human beings who are facing that kind of pressure because of the work that they do, you experience it in very similar ways, whatever culture you come from. And to be a part of a team that was making it possible for these people from very, very different places to meet each other and to find each other in the experiences of others was very moving.
There's a film, Bill Murray film, and
Lost in Translation.
Lost in Translation.
From forensic workshops to being blindfolded in treetops, tune in to listen to us natter about all things Generation Next Surrey with myself, Neve, and my colleague Georgia on Detective Diaries.
But you talk about that chain from Indonesian to English to Spanish, and we've spoken about your experience and speciality enabling you to interpret. Note how carefully I'm trying to use the word interpret as opposed to translate.
I'm very
with my
impressed.
newfound education. But to interpret what is being said, it's a danger when you go perhaps from Indonesian to English to the appropriate Spanish, that things do get literally lost in translation.
Yes.
What happens when you've started to lose that nuance? I mean, are you able to refer back to somebody to
Yes, that happens sometimes. I mean, it very much depends on the context, really, where the work is that you're doing. In this case, what was paramount was that people could communicate with each other. So if something did seem to have got lost, or we weren't quite clear whether what we were hearing was what had been intended, it happened very seldom because it was a really good team of interpreters. But in a situation like that, and it was an organisation that I actually used to work for, but also as an employee, but that also we had worked with a lot. So we had a level of understanding and of trust that, yes, if we felt that it was appropriate to stop and go back and just check that things had been understood properly or conveyed properly, then there was no problem. But if, for instance, I'm doing work, which I've done a few court cases in the High Court as a stuck in a booth, in one case for 3 months, in a court case.
Did they let you out at night?
Yeah, we were allowed out at night. We were even allowed lunch. There, it's the job of the lawyer to say, hold on, not sure that's right, not sure what. It's their job to interpret, to ask the questions if something's not been clear. But that was an interesting job as well, because both sides in that case had their own bilingual staff working for them, and there would be notes at the end of each day where they would ask, sometimes question, how we had rendered, me and my colleague, how we had rendered things that had been said during the day. So that was very, very different. I don't know, they're both fun.
What's the most unusual or memorable setting that you've interpreted?
I think it's one that I had in London. I really quite enjoyed this one. I'd been working for, I have to be a little bit careful because I can't identify
No names,
too
no
closely.
Pedro. But we don't want to be sued either.
No. I was working for someone who had a role in security in a Latin American country, and he'd been brought over by a part of the UK government to attend a security fair, and then.
So he was brought over as a spook, or had he gone in there?
No, he was someone who had a significant role to play in the provision of security in the country that he came from. But at the end of that day, we were taken to the East India Club, which is a posh club in St James's,
Indeed.
just off Pall Mall. And we were sat in Margaret Thatcher's favourite window. She had a window that she loved that looked out over St James's Square. And we were told the story of how her own security people had said to her, look, Ma'am, I don't know if you say Ma'am to Margaret Thatcher, you can't sit in that window. This was our own internal conflict was at its.
Indeed, as anybody in
height.
Brighton where we're sat will know.
Indeed, all of that. So that was going on when she was enjoying sitting in the window in the East India Club. So she said, well, I'm going to. It's my favourite seat. So they showed us the very thick bulletproof glass that they had put into the curved window that she sat in at the front of the room where we were eating. And that was actually just across the room from the balcony that Neville Chamberlain had stood on to announce that Britain was at war.
September the 4th,
3rd of September,
1939.
I think.
September the 3rd, I beg your pardon, 1939.
So that was quite a
Commencement
setting.
The next day.
That was quite a setting. Excellent wine, and really, honestly, the best lamb I've ever eaten in my life. And there was a guy there who had known this client years previously. He'd worked at the embassy, and I'm not exactly sure what kind of work he did in that embassy, but they knew each other, and there were some interesting stories that they were reminiscing about from the past. And I was employed as an interpreter, and there was a guy there who had invited this man over, and I had to keep interpreting. So I was interpreting things, and I kind of realised halfway through the conversation that I had never been asked to sign the Official Secrets Act. But I am a professional interpreter, and I'm governed by my own rules of confidentiality. So there was no danger that it was going to get out.
Do you think your rules, your self-imposed rules, are equivalent to the Official Secrets Act, or does the Official Secrets Act lack a little?
I've no idea. I've never signed it, so I've never read it.
The loveliest answer I've heard from you this afternoon is, I've no idea. It's so delightfully honest. I mean, personally, my languages leave a little bit to design. No, my languages leave a lot to be desired. But yeah, I have seen you work. But that whole interpreting process, what does it feel like to you when you're there and you're immersed in it? I mean, do you become the other person, or do you?
I often describe it as something that, if it's going well, it doesn't always go well. There are different kinds of interpreting as well. So I will do simultaneous interpreting in a booth where I've got very high quality sound coming in, and I've got microphones, and the separation between what the speaker is saying and what I'm saying is really, really good. And so that kind of puts you in a cocoon.
You must have a good ear for speech, particularly.
I think so, but the funny thing is I've got a terrible voice for accents. I'm really bad at reproducing how people speak. But yeah, I think I'm quite empathetic. I think I'm quite good at interpreting people, getting them, and I seem to be pretty good at finding a way to render that without too much trouble. So if I'm doing simultaneous work, then honestly, I describe it sometimes as, it feels a bit like meditation. I've got this sound coming into my head, and then I'm semi-conscious, and there's a process by which what I'm hearing almost in real time, I'm producing in what I hope is idiomatic and understandable English. So that's something I find that. So it's like one of those semi-trance states. I'm a cyclist, so if I'm cycling around and I've got, my cadence is perfect, and the sun is shining, and the birds are singing, and the tarmac is flat and smooth, and the rhythms are just going. It's that kind of feeling. Or I paint as well. So if I'm painting a picture and things just feel like they're working, that they're flowing, a flow state, it feels like that. But then there's other interpreting. There's consecutive interpreting, which is what I did for you guys with the Colombian witness, where they will speak and I will be scribbling notes, and then I will reproduce what they've said. That's what I did for Super Barrio, for instance. And I really enjoy doing that too. There is the performance aspect of it, which I like. If I'm doing it for an audience, I said before that I was a bit of a tart. I do enjoy the sense that the audience is thinking, wow, that's a nice feeling. I often get people coming up, and they're normally the bilingual people coming up at the end and saying, that was fantastic. That's a great feeling. And then people say, you must have an amazing memory. I think my short-term memory is quite good. My long-term memory is rubbish.
Okay.
But the notes that I scribble are my own sort of private way of notes, but they're good enough to be able to reproduce like 10 minutes of speech, probably. I can do more. In fact, you can, but I tend not to, because especially if people haven't seen you working before, the audience gets nervous.
Yes.
And so you need to kind of keep a balance between, and also I think it's important to have the person who you're interpreting for, their voice to be at the forefront. And that means that having a balance between how much I'm being heard and how much the actual focus.
So in many ways you need to almost be invisible. Metaphorically.
You're definitely invisible when you're doing the whispering, but you're not invisible when you're doing consecutive. You're actually very visible.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah. But you try and be humble. As you can tell, I'm a very humble person from the way I'm talking about what I do.
Get involved. Detective Diaries is interactive, which involves you, the listener. Do you have a case you'd like discussed? A burning question about investigative life? send an email to podcast@private-detectives.co.uk or reach out via social media. You may hear your story featured in an upcoming episode. Don't forget to leave your contact details.
I'm sitting here trying to conceive. I mean, of course I can't. I'm not a linguist. But I'm imagining sort of language flowing through your head, like in the way that we do with our natural language. We don't think being English, we don't think about speaking English, we just get on and do it, and it comes from our brains and through our bodies. But and imagine that sort of language coming through your head and engaging some sort of unconscious process. And the analogy I can think about, I speak French, I do not speak French fluently, it has got better. The difference when I am in France of speaking French, because I'm immersed in it, listening to the radio and whatever, and I can see you nodding, I can see how you you relate to this, compared to when I'm in England and I meet somebody French and I just go, stumble, and I can't do anything with it. And I have a friend in Paris, Christophe, who happens to be a language teacher. Obviously fluent in his natural French, but also in English and Italian. And he is great to be with because he won't correct, but he'll help and encourage, and he'll sort of change a mood and change a nuance and change a word there as I'm speaking, and just help the process an awful lot better. But something that he says and tells me is that you've got to feel the language. It's not the translation, it's not the words, it's not the vocabulary, but once you start to feel it, you just speak it.
Yeah.
I can remember, I don't want this to be about me, but I can remember an instance. I was working in France with a couple of colleagues. We were staying in an Airbnb in a place we'd been to 4 or 5 times beforehand. I learned they were leaving. Concierge, who was absolutely lovely, came to pack up the bungalow where 3 of us had been staying. And she started talking, and I started talking to her, and we were talking for 20 minutes. And our 2 colleagues, neither of whom could really speak French, were just looking, going, I had no idea you could speak it that well. And afterwards, I think my response was, actually, neither did I. Does that kind of make sense to you and relate? It's because I was feeling it, and I was into the conversation, and
Yeah. I don't know really. I mean, I might say something that you're going to be a bit surprised to hear. My Spanish is very good, but I'm not bilingual. I learned Spanish as an adult. So I was 24, 23 or so when I first started learning Spanish. And I'm good at understanding what people mean. It's a question of intuition, and I'm pretty fluent in my own language, but I also am pretty fluent in my Spanish, but I will make grammatical errors.
Yeah, but I do that in English.
Yeah,
you do that in English. We all do that in English.
I do, it's true.
And we always, when somebody is speaking,
say,
I'm sorry, can you say that again, because we haven't quite heard it.
That's true.
And these are the things that my friend has said to me, that these are natural things.
Yeah.
Do you know, you talk about adults and children.
Oh, God,
my daughter's husband's brother, can't think what relationship that makes him, daughter's brother-in-law, is Estonian, married to somebody Taiwanese and living in England. Now, their daughter, at the age of 5, will pick the person that she's speaking to, whether they are Estonian or Taiwanese or English, and speak to them in their language. Because at the age of 5, she naturally speaks all 3.
Well, we brought up our children as bilingual, and I actually read a book. I prepared myself, and I read a book. It was a Scandinavian book on bringing up children bilingually, and the takeaway from that book was have one person identified with one language and the other person identified with the other.
Gotcha.
Which is easier to do when there's only 2 involved.
Yes.
3 is different, and that's what we did. It worked. And then when they got older and they realised that actually both of us could speak both, then we started speaking Spanglish, and that became quite fun. And we still speak Spanglish, and we enjoy it. And we play, like we were playing a word game. It was my birthday the other day, and we were playing an online word game with my daughter, who's currently living in Colombia, and another one who's living in London. And we agreed that we were going to play after the first round, when my eldest daughter got a bit cross because the younger one had used a Spanish word in the game, we agreed that we were playing bilingual stop rather than monolingual, which makes things easier. So we did that, but I actually used to work with refugees as well. I worked with the Refugee Council, and we set up a home for child refugees who at that time were coming from the Horn of Africa mainly, and from northern Uganda. And we'd have these kids who were coming in, they were 15, 16 years old. They spoke 4, 5 languages, exactly as you were saying, because they were all spoken where they lived. And to communicate with different groups that you lived close to, you had to have a few languages.
James, I could talk for hours and hours, and I'm sure we probably will, but quite conscious of time. Before we go, I think for anybody hearing this who probably can't hear the background noise, we have recorded this in a fantastic pub in Brighton called The Dyke, so we'd really love to give a shout out to James, who's behind the bar. I've got the place name right, haven't I?
Yeah, it's called the Dyke Tavern on the corner of Dyke Road and Highcroft Villas.
We don't normally do adverts, but that one is really well
Opposite
deserved.
the Tesco Express.
Not sure we can say Tesco Express.
Oh, well, you can edit that out.
Okay, don't say Tesco Express ever
All right,
again.
then.
Okay.
Yeah, it's called the Dyke Tavern on the corner of Dyke Road and Highcroft Villas, and they've been really accommodating to us. So thanks, James.
Thank you for that. James, not James behind the bar, but James Lupton, who I've had the most pleasant afternoon with. Can you just leave with one message? We have discovered we have quite a number of listeners in Spain.
Oh.
So can we leave with a message for our Spanish listeners?
Oh, well, I'm the interpreter, so it's your words that I should be interpreting into Spanish.
That's putting me on the spot. Okay, try this, James. Here's a test. Thank you for listening once again to Detective Diaries. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. You've been listening to James Lupton on Detective Diaries.
Gracias de nuevo por haber escuchado a Detective Diaries. Nos puedes encontrar en Spotify, en Apple Podcast o donde descargas tus podcasts. Han estado escuchando a James Lupton en Detective Diaries. Hasta luego.
We hope you enjoyed today's podcast, brought to you by Answers Investigation and UK Fingerprint. If you've enjoyed our conversation and want to learn more about the fascinating world of investigations, be sure to check out Private Detectives Answers Investigation. Their experienced team offers a wide range of discreet and professional services, helping you find the answers you need with integrity and expertise. If you're interested in fingerprint analysis or require specialist fingerprint services, don't miss UK Fingerprint. As one of the leading fingerprint companies in the UK, they provide everything from identification to background checks, working with individuals, businesses, financial institutions, and gambling companies. To find out more, visit www.private-detectives.co.uk, that's a minus sign, and www.ukfingerprint.co.uk. These are your go-to resources for investigative solutions and fingerprint expertise.